Week one is in the books for the Detroit Lions. They get the hard earned victory in overtime, 26-20 over the Los Angeles Rams in a rematch of Wild Card weekend in the playoffs. This game, I have to admit, I was pretty nervous. Going into it, I would say I predicted the Lions would win, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have lost to this Rams team because there's a lot of talent on this roster. The Rams, returning essentially all of their starters on offense, Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams for an expanded role in his second year as a starter, third season in the league. Cooper Kupp, healthy. Puka Nakua, healthy. Obviously, things changed throughout the game. An offensive line for the Rams that was pretty beat up, missing a couple of starters, and a defense missing one of the best of all time in Aaron Donald. But a couple of additions through the draft of some very talented pieces that we got to see out there. Now, the Detroit Lions, very healthy team, offensive line all intact, new addition Kevin Zeitler out there. Wide receiver, a question mark. Obviously, we lost Josh Reynolds. Amon-Ra St. Brown is returning, but we have Jameson Williams now being firmly planted into that number two receiver spot, but no X receiver. Looking for that big body guy. We'd signed Tim Patrick and Allen Robinson to the practice squad, but they were not elevated for this week. And our big season acquisition of DJ Reader was out as well. So we were missing our interior defensive lineman, which helps us for that run defense that was second in the league last year. So going into this game, a retooled secondary of Detroit versus this prolific Rams offense that carved us up pretty good in the playoffs. Now, some things were similar. Matthew Stafford, pushed the ball down the field often and early. One of the biggest takeaways for this game is how our defensive line played. Their offensive line a little bit beat up. So what does Sean McVay do? What does Matthew Stafford do? They designed a lot of motion in their offense, a lot of quick reads. First read, Stafford getting the ball out quick, not allowing our pass rush to get home because our pass rush was very active. I was incredibly impressed with Aiden Hutchinson, who's always, giving maximum effort, ended up with a sack, 4 quarterback hits. But Marcus Davenport, a guy who's been injured for a majority of his career, but is very productive when he does play, had 3 quarterback hits, had a half a sack. That was impressive for me because if this guy can stay healthy, he's a big body guy, 6'7", almost 300 pounds. He's somebody we can use. And he was in their backfield very often. But Stafford, being the smart quarterback that he is, got the ball out quick. So how do you, make up or compensate for an offensive line that's compromised and a pass rush that's, will get there? Got to get the ball out quick. And the Rams run more motion than any other team in the NFL. So you saw a lot of Cooper Kupp, slants across the middle. And that's what the Rams do, and that's why they're effective. When you look at the stats, you see Cooper Kupp with 14 catches, but it was only for 110 yards. Typically, if a guy is carving you up, you get 14 catches, you're going to be 150 to almost 200 yards. But that wasn't the case. Now, he was getting a lot of first downs, but when you think of his average, it was less than 8 yards per catch. So that is how this Detroit defense is designed. They will give up some catches, underneath, but they're not going to get burned for the big play. And when you look at it, Cooper Kupp's largest reception was only 21 yards. Every play was only going for, that was the biggest play. If you take out the exception of their other receiver who caught one for 63, but it was a missed tackle that would have been for less than 10 yards, but a blown tackle led to 63 yards. So that's how Detroit's defense plays. And when you look at last year, we had only given up 23 points. They made it into the red zone 3 times and were 0 for 3 in those opportunities. And same thing early on in this game. They made it to the red zone a lot, but Detroit's defense that, would bend to get there would not break. And so they only gave up 20 points to a Rams offense that everybody knows is very prolific. Now, obviously, Puka Nakua gets hurt, but the Rams only had 3 points, at half when he was healthy in the game. So I don't think that impacts it much, especially for the Rams. And here's why I say that, because Puka Nakua is great. But what I will say is that when Matthew Stafford tends to have both of those receivers out there, one of them has a big game. The other one does not. If you remember, think back to the playoff game where Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp were both healthy, and Stafford passed for a ton of yards. It was what, like 195 yards for Puka Nakua and only 30 something for Cooper Kupp. So I don't think it made that much of a difference. All it pretty much did was it, solidified that Stafford was going to focus on one receiver, which he typically does anyway. We got that red zone interception by Kirby Joseph, which is very important because we know Stafford is known to throw one away, oftentimes leading to a pick six. So we got that, and that was important. Red zone defense for the win. Now let's talk about our young cornerbacks. Terrion Arnold got called for a few penalties. It's his first game. I'm not gonna beat him up for that. What I will say is that when you compare his performance to Jeff Okudah, who I actually posted a video about earlier as I was at the Texans Colts game and saw him there, Jeff Okudah would stand, an additional 3 yards back because he was giving up so much space because he didn't want to get beat deep. And these receivers were catching everything. They would easily catch 10 yards because he was dropping back 15 yards. Whereas Terrion Arnold was step for step with these receivers. Now, Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp are elite. So they're going to get theirs even when they're guarded by the best of defenders. This is a tough game to go out there and play, but I was impressed, and he's only going to get better. The same way I don't scold Caleb Williams. I know he struggled in his game with the Bears, but he's going to get better. Similar to how our rookies are going to get better. Brian Branch, I do expect him to be better with tackling. He missed quite a few tackles early on. And that's something we can't afford to do, especially when you think about a Rams team that is catching a lot of quick slants over the middle. You've got to wrap them up. Otherwise, they're going to keep chipping away and getting first downs and moving down the field. And it was tough. But I mean, you think about the yards given up. Matthew Stafford threw for well over 300 yards, but only one touchdown pass. This team only had 2 offensive touchdowns. That's a win. You hold a team to 20 points. Offensively for us, I expect better. I really don't know what the game plan was, and I was a little confused with what Ben Johnson was doing early on. Whereas we needed to stick with our run early and often. Like, we bring in Kevin Zeitler, our offensive line. We hear about it all off season being one of the best offensive lines in the league, if not number one. We'll stick to it. Like, hand that ball off to Montgomery and Gibbs, which they spread the ball around to both of them. Gibbs with I think 11 carries, Montgomery with 17, but Gibbs with 6 targets, Montgomery with only 1, so about 17, 18 touches apiece. Amon-Ra St. Brown, not as involved in this game, still with 6 targets, but only a few catches. So not super impactful, but he's the guy that the defense keys on. So a lot of times he might be a decoy, and you eliminate him from the game, and you need somebody to step up. And who better to step up than Jameson Williams? What a career day. The guy had 9 targets, which is 2 more than his career high. It only had 7 before. He had 100 plus yards, which was the most in his career, and a touchdown, 5 catches. This was the breakout game we all wanted to see. We knew the guy had the talent, but he was used sparingly in the offense because of suspension and injuries the past couple of years. But now he's solidified as number 2, and I like to call him 1B. 1A and 1B for him and Amon-Ra St. Brown, as they're both super talented. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jameson Williams does end up being the number 1 yards guy on this team, because he's a guy that's going to be that deep threat. So he may catch fewer passes than Amon-Ra, but the yards are going to be there. Sam Laporta and those guys will get involved more in future games. But right now, what we were able to do on offense was enough. Jared Goff was a little rusty. I'd like to see him making better decisions. That pick was very poor. Had another one that was almost picked. But it's the first game of the season. He didn't play in the preseason. He'll settle down. He'll settle in. The offensive line in overtime asserted themselves, and that is what we wanted to see. They were dominant. I think only throwing the ball one time. They ran and ran and ran, and the Rams defensive line could not stop them. This Rams team's talented. A lot of quick defenders that, got a little bit of pressure on Goff, but we were able to get the job done, and that's what you want to see. A tough game, but ultimately Detroit comes out on top. All right, go Lions.